The mist hung low over Lake Mourn like a shroud, its tendrils curling across the glassy surface as though the water itself exhaled secrets too heavy to bear. Elias Crane stood at the edge, his boots sinking into the damp, peaty soil, the cold seeping through the soles as if the earth hungered for his warmth. He'd come to this forsaken place, an unremarkable blotch on the map of upstate New York. Chasing whispers. Stories of the lake monster had trickled into his inbox for months, each email more frantic than the last, sent by a fisherman named Amos Reed. The final message, received 3 days ago, was a garbled plea. "It's not just a thing, it's everything. Help me." Then silence. Amos hadn't answered calls or texts since, and Elias, a freelance journalist with a penchant for the uncanny, couldn't resist the pull. The lake stretched before him, a vast, inky mirror reflecting a sky bruised with twilight. No birds sang, no wind stirred the skeletal trees ringing the shore. The stillness was a weight, pressing against his chest, making each breath a conscious effort. He'd read the legends, tales of a creature older than the hills, a serpentine horror that locals called the Mournwraith. Most dismissed it as folklore, a yarn spun to keep kids from swimming too deep. But Amos's words gnawed at him. "It's everything. What did that mean?" Elias adjusted the strap of his backpack, heavy with a camera, notebook, and a thermos of coffee he'd already half drunk on the drive from Albany. He wasn't here to debunk or sensationalize. He wanted the truth, whatever it cost. The shoreline curved into a narrow path, barely visible beneath a carpet of moss and fallen leaves. Amos's cabin, according to the coordinates he'd sent weeks earlier, lay a mile ahead, tucked into a cove where the lake bent like a crooked finger. Elias started walking, the crunch of his steps obscenely loud in the hush. The mist thickened as he went, swallowing the horizon until the lake vanished behind a gray veil. His flashlight beam cut through it, a frail thread of light that seemed to drown in the gloom. Shadows twitched at the edges of his vision, branches, he told himself, or reeds swaying in a breeze he couldn't feel. But the air was dead and the shapes moved too fluidly, too deliberately. By the time the cabin emerged from the fog, Elias's nerves were taut as piano wire. It was a squat, weathered thing, its cedar planks warped and blackened by decades of damp. The windows stared blankly, their glass smeared with grime, and the door hung ajar, creaking faintly as though caught in a sigh. He called out, "Amos? You here?" His voice fell flat, absorbed by the mist like a stone dropped into tar. No answer came. He stepped onto the sagging porch, the wood groaning under his weight, and nudged the door wider with his boot. The smell hit him first. Rancid, wet, a mix of rot and something metallic. Inside, the cabin was a mausoleum of neglect. A single room, sparsely furnished. A cot in one corner, a table littered with fishing gear and crumpled beer cans, a wood stove cold and ashen. But what seized his attention was the wall. Every inch was plastered with papers, yellowed newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, photographs curling at the edges. Elias approached, his flashlight trembling slightly as it illuminated the chaos. Headlines screamed of disappearances. Local girl vanishes near Lake Mourn, 1973. Fisherman lost, boat found empty, 1989. Scrawled in red ink across one article were the words "I takes them all." The photos were worse. Grainy shots of the lake at night, some showing ripples where no wind should have been, others capturing vague, elongated shapes beneath the surface. One image, pinned dead center, was a close-up of the water's edge, and in it a shadow loomed, tall, sinuous, its edges bleeding into the darkness like ink spilled in oil. Below it, in Amos's shaky hand, "I saw it, saw me, I saw me." Elias's pulse quickened. He fumbled for his camera, snapping pictures of the wall, the flash strobing in the dimness. Then he noticed the notebook on the table, its cover stained with what looked like dried blood. He opened it, the pages crackling as he turned them. Amos's entries began mundanely, dates, fish counts, weather notes, but devolved into madness. October 12th, heard it again, the hum under the water. Like a voice but not words. October 19th, saw eyes in the lake last night. Not fish, not human. The final entry, dated 3 days ago, was a single line. "It's not in the lake, it is the lake." Elias reread it, his mouth dry. The lake monster wasn't a creature swimming in the depths. It was the water itself? The idea was absurd, yet it burrowed into his mind, sharp and insistent. A sound broke his reverie, a low, resonant thrum, like a tuning fork struck deep underwater. It vibrated through the cabin, rattling the cans on the table, buzzing in his teeth. He stumbled to the window, peering into the mist. The lake was closer now, its edge lapping at the porch where dry land had been minutes before. Impossible. The water couldn't rise that fast, not without a storm or a breach. But there it was, black and gleaming, inching toward the cabin with a slow, deliberate creep. The thrum grew louder, pulsing in time with his heartbeat, and beneath it, a whisper slithered into his ears. Not words, but a sensation, cold and vast, promising answers if he'd only step closer. He didn't want to. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee back to his car and forget this place. But his feet moved anyway, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't name. He stepped outside, the porch now slick with lake water, and stood at the edge where the liquid kissed his boots. It wasn't just water. It shimmered faintly, iridescent, threaded with veins of shadow that writhed like living things. The thrum was deafening now, a chorus of unseen voices pressing against his skull. He knelt, trembling, and reached out. His fingers brushed the surface, and the world shattered. Images flooded his mind, fractured, overwhelming. He saw the lake as it had been eons ago, a crater gouged by something that fell from the sky, something that wasn't a meteor but alive, sentient, infinite. It sank into the earth, fusing with the water, becoming the lake itself. He saw it feed not on flesh but on minds, drawing in those who lingered too long, unraveling their sanity thread by thread. Faces flashed before him, Amos, the missing girl, countless others, screaming as their thoughts were stripped away, their selves dissolving into the entity that held them. It wasn't a monster in the lake. It was the lake and more, a fragment of something older, vaster, a consciousness that spanned realities, tethered here but reaching beyond. Elias yanked his hand back, gasping, but the connection didn't break. The water clung to his skin, a thin film that pulsed with intent. He staggered to his feet, the cabin blurring around him as the mist thickened into a choking fog. The lake surged, waves rising where none should be, and in their crests he saw shapes, limbs, eyes, mouths that gaped and closed, formed not of flesh but of liquid shadow. They sang to him, a hymn of despair and invitation, urging him to join them, to know them. He ran, blind and stumbling, the path lost beneath a tide that pursued him with relentless patience. Hours bled into eternity. He didn't know how he reached his car, only that he did, the lake's edge now a distant shimmer in his rear-view mirror as he floored the gas. The thrum faded, but the whisper lingered, a splinter lodged in his psyche. Back in Albany, he tried to write it down, to purge it, but the words twisted on the page, forming patterns he couldn't read. Sleep brought no relief, dreams of drowning in a sea that stared back, its depths a mirror reflecting not his face but a void that knew his name. The film from his camera, when developed, showed nothing but black frames, each one streaked with faint, coiling lines. Days later, he burned Amos's notebook and deleted the emails, but the lake followed him. In every glass of water, every raindrop, he felt it watching. The revelation was too big, too incomprehensible. The Mournwraith wasn't confined to that crater. It was a shard of something unfathomable, a presence that had seeped into the world's veins, waiting for those foolish enough to seek it. Elias stopped writing, stopped searching. He sits now in his apartment, curtains drawn, listening to the drip of a faucet he can't bring himself to fix. Each drop is a call, a reminder that the unknowable doesn't just endanger existence. It unravels it, one fragile mind at a time. And he knows, with a certainty that gnaws at his soul, that it's still out there, patient and eternal, waiting for him to answer.